Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5, as we get one final glimpse, at least for our time together, into the throne room of God. I hope it's exhilarating to you as much as it is to me to think about what heaven will be like. One of my favorite things to ponder is the essence of heaven. And certainly this particular set of chapters enlightens us and gives us a better glimpse of what that will be like. We are drawing our attention. We have looked at the prepositions in Revelation chapter 4 and chapter 5 as it deals with the glory of God in particular. We have looked at the praise in Revelation 4 and 5 as it's directed towards God. And now we're going to broaden the scope just a little bit, and we're going to look at the persons that are here, the individuals, the people, if we can call them people, the beings that are here. And we're gonna break this up, and we're going to look individually at 5 different persons that are here in this particular place. And the first one, as we begin in Revelation chapter 4, is the Father. And appropriately so, right? To to come into the throne room, the first one that is seen, the first one that is mentioned, written down for us, is the one sitting on the throne. And we see a few things here in Revelation chapter 4, in the first couple of verses, a few things about God the Father in particular. Uh, First, in verse 1, actually, let's read it. After this, I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet said, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this." You see the plan, the plan of God as it unfolds for us, what must take place after this. Now, as we have seen, as we read through the book of Revelation, we've got the 7 churches of Asia Minor. We've got them written down, described for us, and they're going through a lot of persecution. Every single one of them is going through hardship, spiritually or physically. They're going through some type of trial. And then it's interesting because after this, we see the plan of God, what must take place. All of this is part of God's plan, even down to the persecution and the tribulation and the heartache that goes along with this life. It's all part of God's plan. And you think about it, why is a great, awesome, and omnibenevolent God allowing hardship and agony and pain and turmoil and the things that we read about in Revelation? Why is he? And then you back up and you think just for a moment, oh, that's part of his goodness, isn't it? Doesn't that speak to his love for us? To allow us to make our own decisions? It's all part of God's plan. And when you think about the heartache, doesn't that make you want to go to heaven that much more? It's all part of God's plan. If we had this life and if it was just peachy, if this world were a heaven, why would we ever want to leave? But this world is full of what this world is full of. And therefore, we have the plan of God to bring us to something better, so much better than what we have here in this life. So it's the plan. You see the plan of God. And of course, in verse 2, and once I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne stood in heaven, and one seated on the throne. You see, the very first thing, as we approach the throne room, as we get a glimpse into this, we see the preeminence of God. Here he is, front and center. This is the most dominant figure in heaven. And it will be wonderful. And we joke sometimes, and maybe we don't joke, and sometimes we might be even serious about it. Well, I'll see you on the other side. I'll see you on the southeast corner of heaven. Have you ever heard that? That's what the deaf and balls, that's what they always say. If you want to meet a deaf and ball, go to the southeast corner of heaven if you can find it. That's where they'll be. They might be wandering around. Preeminence. We might see those things. We might meet Paul. We might meet Peter. We might meet Abraham, so on and so forth. But that's not why we're there, right? It's God. And the whole throne room scene in chapter 4 and chapter 5, all of it, every single bit of it, it revolves around God. So do not lose sight of God, because yeah, I mean the road paved with gold, that would be cool, or the sea of glass. I mean, that would be kind of neat, or the tree of life, wouldn't that be swell? But that isn't the point. The point is the preeminence of God. It is all about God. We don't need to forget it one bit. And then you look at verse 3 as we think about the character of God, the nature of God. You see his plan, you see his preeminence. And verse 3 reads like this: And he who sat there had the appearance of jasper and carnelian, and around the throne was a rainbow that had the appearance of an emerald. Kind of strange description, but it does remind you of the promises of God. And that's why we're reading the book of Revelation to begin with. That's why we're looking here. It's all about the promise of God, because God's promised us something better. And that's what we are striving for, is something better. The promise of God. And perhaps you think about the rainbow, you think about the promise that God made to Noah. Maybe you think about the flood, how God, in his great wrath and anger, he destroyed the sinful humanity that was there. But on the flip side of that, the promise of God, the rainbow, and the very fact that there were 8 people that were saved, doesn't that demonstrate the mercy of God? So when we think about the rainbow as it's been taken over in our society by evil, think about the wrath of God, but how merciful God is. How God always saves, how God is continually patient and forbearing with us in our weaknesses. So there we have a glimpse of God. Who is God? What God is in this particular throne room. Just a small tidbit of his character. And as we move through chapter 4, we arrive at our second group of individuals, and that's these 24 elders. Now, let me stop there and say this. I don't know. I don't know. I just don't know. As many commentaries as you read is as many opinions as you have. I'll give you 3. Who are these 24 elders? I just don't know. I've got my opinion. Here's 3 of them. You have in Isaiah, let me find it here, Isaiah chapter 24 and verse 23. That it could be referring to this order of angels that you have as you look in Isaiah chapter 24 and 23. It seems eerily similar to what you see here. So it could be these select 24 angels that are surrounding the throne of God and giving him praise. It could be, as many postulate, that it's a representation of the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles as an accumulation of the Old and the New Testament. It could be. You know, if you remember in Matthew chapter 19 and in verse 28, that it was Jesus who said to the apostles, "You will sit on 12 thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel." That could be it. And if you turn to First Chronicles, you're going to see there that there are 24 priests that were selected in the service by David, selected in the service of what would then be the tabernacle, but soon be the temple of God, which would be symbolic of what we see here. I don't know. And I am fully convinced that the number 24 is not what is important. And we can get caught up on not not the trees and miss the forest. We can get caught up on the moss on the tree and miss the tree and the forest altogether, right? So let's back up and let's appreciate what we see and what we notice here. We see, as we think about these 24 elders in verse 4, we see that they are pure. That when we get to the presence of God, when we get into the throne room, what is necessary is purity. That they are clothed, in verse 4, it says that they are clothed in pure white and pure, unblemished robes. So, in the presence of God, there is a requirement of purity. Be holy as I am holy. And then we get to be in the royal holiness's presence. And of course, again, in verse 4, chapter 4 and verse 4, where are they? Well, they are around the throne, they are surrounding the throne. I think the image, it procures something that's special because there's 24 elders sitting on 24 thrones surrounding one throne. Those 24 elders are not what is important. What is in the middle is what's important. Even though they have, in some symbolic way, they have dominion and they have reign and power, but they give it up, which leads us to verse 10, I believe, where these 24 elders bow down and they take the crowns from their heads and they throw it before the throne. It gives us a glimpse of no matter how powerful, no matter how wonderful you are, that in the presence of God, we are nothing. I think Nebuchadnezzar could attest to that, don't you? I think a whole host of kings and queens throughout history can attest to the fact that in the presence of God, I am nothing. And when we get to be with God, we will understand our futility and our insignificance. I think that's one thing among many that the 24 elders sitting on the 24 thrones teaches us. But we move on from there very quickly. See the Father, we see the 24 elders, and we see from there, we see these four living creatures. Now, let me back up. Let me tell you, I don't know. I just don't know. And I would be very leery of somebody that said, I got the answers. But let me give you a few possibilities, a few things that I've read that it could be, whether they are of any merit or not. Some people believe that this is a representation of these four living creatures, and they give each one specific characteristics. Let's read about it. The four living creatures in verse 6. Verse 7 is their description. The first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, the third living creature with the face of a man, and the fourth living creature like an eagle in flight. I don't know necessarily what they are. Some people think that this represents the four gospels, and you could argue that way, that each one in the way that they ride and the way that the Spirit moves their pen is similar in some ways to the characteristics of these animals that are described here. And there's some merit to that, perhaps. There's also this indication that as the Israelites camped and as they moved from Egypt into the land of Canaan, they were given specific locations of which they were supposed to camp. But it all surrounded, here's the kicker, it all surrounded the tabernacle. Some on the north, some on the south, some on the east, some on the west. It all surrounded it. It surrounded the tabernacle. What was the central figure through everything was the presence of God. So some people will give a description to these tribes, and each one representing a different direction of which the children of Israel, and there could be some merit to that. And there's another suggestion out there that these four living creatures are a representation of all creation. If we think about the noblest of the creatures, we have them here. If we think about the wisest of the creatures, they're here. Or the swiftest of the creatures, they're here. Or if we think about the fastest, the swiftest of the creatures, they're all listed. All the characteristics, the greatest characteristics are listed here. So we could be talking about a representation of all of creation. And whatever it is, the four living creatures, again, don't get caught up on the moss of the tree and forget to look at the forest. So let's back up and let's look. Whatever they are. I think it's eerily similar, and I don't think it would be too far-fetched that these are directly connected in some way, if not the exact same, as those creatures that we see in Ezekiel chapter 1 or in Isaiah chapter 6. I think that would be a great reference if you want to go back and look at some of the other descriptions as those writers get a similar glimpse into heaven. I think that would be a good place to start. But at the end of the day, I don't know, and I'm not sure that anybody else knows for sure. But this is what they do. This is what's important, at least in my mind, is that whatever they are, whatever these four living creatures are, is that they give God praise, right? Because we see it here, and it's carried throughout the entire book of Revelation, is that it's over and over and over again, these four living creatures. If you do a quick search, it's easy to find the four living creatures, and you see every time, what are they doing? They're giving God praise. Every single time they are worshiping God, they're serving God in some capacity. They are also doing God's bidding. In chapter 15, you're going to see that these four living creatures are summoned and that they fulfill the task of God that He asked them to do. So we know that they are at the service of God. And we also know, of course, that they're not the focus. Like any of these other things, they're not the focus on what is important in heaven. We can get caught up on these things, and that's good. And it's good to study and to be curious and to let that guide you. But don't forget, God is what's important here. And that's what these four living creatures remind us. Because John sees them and he describes them, because I don't think it's anything like he's ever seen before. But then they redirect the attention to God. They don't take the attention. I think that's an important lesson for us. The 24 elders, the four living creatures, the Father, and we continue moving through that. We arrive at chapter 5. In chapter 5, we have the Son, the people in the throne room, the persons in the throne room. We see the Son, and we know about the Son. We love the Son, don't we? That's the reason we're here, is because He gives us access to God. But consider, beginning in verse 5, consider this paradoxical paradigm that we see in verse 5, because a lot of this, it doesn't make sense in the literal way. And one of the elders said to me, after John was weeping bitterly because no one was able to open up the scroll, and up pops this lamb. And he says in verse 5, weep no more. Behold, here's our description, the paradigm, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has conquered so that He can open the scroll and its seven seals. Man, if there is one verse that is chock full of goodies, that's it. Couple. He is the Lion and the Lamb. Does that make sense? Is there a world in which that's okay? Is there a world in which those two coexist? He is the lion and the lamb. Obviously, I don't know where your mind goes when you think about Jesus as the lion and the lamb. Mine goes to the Passion Week. Triumphal entry, regal, the lion, walking into the temple, overturning the tables like a lion, casting out the money changers, the cages to the doves, driving out the animals like a lion. And a few days later, carrying his cross up to Golgotha like a lamb. Or in the garden, being kissed, just like a little gentle lamb, who just a couple days earlier was ferocious in his attack, in his stance for righteousness. The lion and the lamb. But then the next description here in verse 5 is yes, the lion of the tribe of Judah. Now we understand that we know that he was going to come from the tribe of Judah because David was from the tribe of Judah. But if you remember, Judah was the one tribe that remained faithful. In all the horrible ideas of captivity, Judah was the remnant that remained. And here comes from the remnant the sprout. But it's interesting because he's not called the branch, he's called the root. Now, okay, I know most of us probably aren't professional arborists, but we get a pretty clear idea. Which one comes first, the root or the branch? The root, right? The root comes first. You got to have roots before you can have a branch. We're very well aware of that. So logically, if I'm reading this, you would think that he would be the branch of David, don't you think? But here he's called the root of David, as if he is the one that is holding up the throne of David, as if he is the predecessor of David. Isn't that fascinating? And later on, if you turn to the very end in chapter 22, he is in fact called the root and the branch of David. This is the paradigm, the paradox of who this lamb is. But if you continue reading, you look at verse 6, and between the throne and the four living creatures, among the elders, I saw a lamb standing as though it had been slain. Pause. Here's the Son, and we see him standing as though he had been slain. This picture of a lamb. And perhaps, I don't know what's in your mind, but I see this lamb standing with blood dripping from his throat, as though he's been slaughtered. The word mortally wounded or maimed. He has this wound that he should be dead. But there's a very important word that gets passed. He is standing. Perfect participle. Perfect in the fact that it continues. Participle in the fact that he is doing it right now and he will always be doing it. The perfect tense in the participle is a beautiful idea that Jesus, he has conquered and he will continue to be conquering. He is standing. There is no reason for this maimed, dead looking lamb to be standing. But it's like Rocky at the end of the movie. He just gets up. He just gets up. That is Jesus. The slain lamb that is standing. continuously conquering. As though it had been slain, continuing in verse 6, with 7 horns and with 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent out into all the earth. Now, if you get this picture of a 7 horned lamb with 7 eyes, you're looking at something that's a little trippy. But the horn, throughout the Bible, very quickly, the horn was used to represent power. 7, very often, is the number that was used to represent perfect. So, what you see here is a picture of a perfectly powerful lamb. Tell me if that makes sense. A lamb that is powerful, not just powerful. He is powerful and perfect in his power and omniscient with 7 eyes. Again, reiterating the beauty of his power. In every single way, he is perfect. Then, lastly, everybody's favorite word, the preacher says. Lastly, you have the thousands, the angels. Myriads of myriads, thousands of thousands. Verse 11. Then I looked and I heard around the throne the living creatures and the elders and the voice of many angels, numbering myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, hundreds of thousands, if you will, hundreds and hundreds of thousands, saying with a loud voice, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and might and honor and glory and blessing." We see from them, from the angels, we see them fulfilling their purpose. Angel literally means messenger. They are delivering the most important message. They are fulfilling their purpose. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth, wisdom, might, honor, glory, and blessing. I have to ask myself, am I fulfilling my purpose? Direct your attention to their number. I can't even imagine seeing hundreds of thousands of people or of anything, let alone angels singing in unison, "Worthy is the Lamb." God, bring chills up our spine. It's interesting that as you turn and you look at the account in the book of Genesis about Sodom and Gomorrah, that there were 2 angels that entered and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously through the power of God. But just think about this. Here are hundreds of thousands of angels. What must that be like? And of course, they give the direction. Worthy, worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth, wisdom and might, honor, glory, and blessing. If you turn over to the last chapter, in chapter 22 and verse 9, you're going to see that John falls down and at the feet of the angel and he begins worshiping. And the angel draws him up, says, you don't need to do that. Don't worship me. But these angels are worshiping the Lamb, and the Lamb is okay with it. The Lamb is God. The Lamb is worthy. So notice the direction of their praise. They give it to God. They give the glory to God. They give the glory to the Lamb. Isn't that wonderful? These people, the persons that are in the throne room, it's an image that ought to motivate us to get there. And I hope dearly that it does. In order to get there, just like these 24 elders, what's required is that pure clothing. That clothing can only be obtained when we clothe ourselves in Christ and when we live in Him. I hope you're doing that.